you think it will get to a point where, after playing so many games or being asked to play so many games, that the players will say, I don't want to be part of this, and they'll actually end up like going on strike or not refusing to play in such a big kind of calendar?
Yeah, I think we're close to that. I mean, because it's easy to understand. I mean, if we're asking something, anything, I think it's something general. I think you ask any player, he will say the same. It's not like the opinion of Rodri or whatever. No, I think it's a general opinion of the players. And if it keeps this way, it will be a moment that we have no other option.
I was in that press conference, that Man City press conference with Rodri when the question started being asked about the schedule. Obviously, he's the perfect person to ask about it because he plays for City. We've got a mammoth season ahead of them. He's obviously played for Spain in the Euros, and obviously went as far, towards the end of that press conference as saying that he thought that the players could strike to make a point to FIFA and UEFA about the amount of games these top players are playing. Obviously, the question beyond that is that actually possible?
I mean, I spoke to people at the PFA and at FIFA about this, and while they weren't saying that no, it's not possible. The line is that they can't rule anything out. But the reality is that right now their priority, they're telling me that their focus is on the court case they've got against FIFA, which they launched in the summer, about FIFA having basically undue control over the fixture list and basically controlling the fixture list at their own behest. So that court case is currently ongoing, and that's with the EU. So rather than shift the focus to try and persuade their members to vote for a strike, that is their focus, because it's not quite as simple as just saying, the top 1% of the Premier League players, people like Rodri and Alisson Becker also said similar things. I'm sure there are other players and managers that have similar feelings. You can't persuade the whole of the 5,000 members of the PFA to strike without, consultation. And what was said to me was that it's all well and good people like Rodri, who are, let's be honest, they are overworked. They are playing too many games, but, the top end of the game, earning absolute millions. How does their situation compare to a player who plays, for instance, in League Two with, let's say, Accrington Stanley or Newport County, who have, maybe on £500 a week, have a mortgage to pay, have, a wife and two kids who've got to get them through school? And the situation is, would they be willing to give up their work by striking, give up their pay to support multi-million-pound footballers at the top of the pyramid who, let's be honest, are living the dream that they would love to have? So that's why it's not a feasible element at the moment for the strike to go ahead, because you have to get everybody on board. You can't have a vote just involving the people that want to strike. That would be about maybe 100 players. It's a union. The whole union has to vote, and that's 5,000 members. So you would have to get those on board, and that is where the problem lies right now, that it's not feasible to expect the players lower down to give up work and give up pay for players at the top end.
There's obviously in the UK at the moment, there's been a lot of strike action from, trade unions over the last few years with, train drivers and junior doctors, and basically groups of people who are all facing exactly the same set of conditions. Whereas this isn't the case, as Mark's kind of outlined. There's a very real but a very small percentage of players when you take in the whole kind of professional game that this situation affects, and consequently it's kind of quite hard to see a mechanism by which those players can come together and actually force FIFA, UEFA, the governing bodies around a table to say, okay, we'll give some ground here, and ultimately, the organisations, they know that. So really, what this is it's FIFA and it's UEFA and it's even sort of the Premier League and the FA and the EFL and all these clubs, all these entities that have got their own competitions. They take advantage of that really and say, well, if we can nab a little bit more money here by an extra game, then we will. So if FIFA want to expand the Club World Cup, they will. If UEFA want to expand the Europa League and the Champions League, they will, because the clubs, and obviously the clubs are complicit in this. I don't know whether maybe that's an underplayed point in this, that actually the players should be complaining to the clubs and the chief executives, their own chief executives, who've actually signed off on some of this stuff before we start talking about collective action and everything else. Maybe they should actually be having an internal conversation to sort of say, well, look, why did you sign us up for this? The answer, of course, is the money, but then the players are the ones that take the hit physically and mentally.
It's the club owners that we've not heard from. I mean, we've heard from the managers, we've heard Pep, we've heard Arteta, we've heard Erik Ten Hag, all being very vocal about this. There's too many games. We've heard the players. The club owners have been absolutely silent, and they are the people, as you said, James, that can change this straight away. They can say, no, there are too many games. So I think we have to put the pressure on them a little bit. But they are the people we never hear from. You know, I know you spoke to Josh Kroenke in the summer, James, and that was a rare element of a club owner or somebody attached to the ownership who are speaking. It doesn't happen very often. So these people are the decision makers in the game right now. But I think also we have to accept as well that, you know, we're all based in Europe, and it is a very kind of inward-looking argument right now that in Europe the game is overheating. There are too many games. But, you know, I've been told that, you know, people in Asia, in Oceania, New Zealand, for instance, or in North America, even in South America, they see this as a real opportunity. They don't have the same fixture constraints that the players in Europe have. So, yes, it's a big issue in Europe, but globally there is some excitement in some quarters about the Club World Cup. I mean, I'm not sure that we're feeling it because, you know, we know that there are too many games and there's too many pressures put on the players. But, you know, other parts of the world want it, and we have to accept that. And those players aren't playing 70 games a season; they may be playing 40. So this idea that you should restrict players to 50 to 60 games a season, one of the PFA elements is they want to have a limit on how often players can play. They're talking 50 to 60 games, and also they're saying that they want no more than 6 back-to-back games. So basically, at the minute, a back-to-back game is classed as a weekend midweek game. So Saturday, Wednesday, they don't want players to do that more than 6 times in succession. Well, these are all, you know, nice ideas, but how are they going to get them through? How can you apply a limit on games? How can you say to a player you can play 50 games this season, and then you get to March, for instance, and they've got 45 games on the clock? Then they're in a Champions League final, an FA Cup final, going for a league. Are you really saying that those players can play 5 games out of the final 20 of the season? So there's a lot of issues to work through, but, you know, ultimately, I don't think a strike is going to happen anytime soon.
I mean, I don't actually think that the players feel that a strike is a realistic option anyway. I mean, when we were in the room with Rodri, there was a little bit of surprise at how hard he went. I was saying, I think the quote used was that we're quite close to that. But if you speak to the players kind of away from the cameras, I don't think that many of the players think that it's realistic at all. I think really, I mean, you just alluded to it there, that the only people that we get to speak to are managers and players. So the players, Rodri in this case, has to use that opportunity he's been given in a Champions League press conference to speak about it. I think really the players just want a bit more of a say. I know that obviously there are player unions who are meant to look out for the interests of the players. But you speak to a lot of the players and they just don't feel like they're being heard in this at all. They feel like they're literally just, you know, waiting for an email at the start of the season to tell them how many games they've got to play. And I think if you included the players a little bit more, and there is a difficulty with that because you're right in what you're saying about, you know, Rodri's concerns about the fixture list are different to the guy who's playing for Stockport County 5 minutes down the road. But if you include the players a little bit more in that decision-making process, even if it's not a realistic, or even if it's not a major say, but it just include the players in these conversations a bit more, I think your UEFA and FIFA would find that the players are a lot more on board with this, because they understand as well as anyone that it's about money and that they benefit from that money that's in the game in their wages every week. That, I mean, the players aren't stupid; they can see that. I think really they just want a more of a say, a bigger seat at the table, and really just a chance to kind of mould their own future, because at the moment they literally just feel like they're being run into the ground by people who don't really care about their health and well-being.
Sorry, how many agents or players have you spoken to that will be willing to take a pay cut and play less games? Because I've not heard anyone.
Exactly that. And we alluded to on this podcast before about, you know, players don't want to miss games. You know, the conversation that managers have in press conferences isn't about, oh, you know, such and such came to me and said, I can't play for 2 weeks now, I'm tired. He's been banging on the door saying, please, can I play at the weekend? Players don't want to stop playing games. And it's an easy thing for particularly for Rodri to say, because he's one of those top 1% of players who is being asked to do too much. But it's all about money. And you're completely right in what you just said there about agents and players. Players don't want to take a pay cut. I think they just want a greater say in how they're being managed. That's all it is.
Well, the irony, of course, is that Chelsea are in the Club World Cup next year, and they have a squad that is entirely built upon incentivized contracts. You know, if they don't play, they don't get paid as much. And I know that is, quite a standard thing across the Premier League, but it's been taken to an extreme at Chelsea. You know, their average wage now is about 60 grand a week, so they say. But that's topped up a lot if a player plays, if he scores, if they win. But he has to be involved. So if you go to a Chelsea squad, for example, that's on all those heavily incentivised contracts and say, would you like to support a strike where there are fewer matches? They're going to go, well, no, because we're not going to get paid as much. And ultimately, it comes down to the money. And that's why I think one of the interesting elements about, if we focus on the Club World Cup part of it, and I know, Mark, you know quite a lot about this, is that there's not a TV deal in place. And FIFA are having to try and drum one up. And obviously the money is coming primarily into football from those big TV contracts. So do you think that might signal a bit of a tipping point, that this 2018 World Cup has not had broadcasters knocking down the door? Or is it a case that FIFA have just simply overvalued it?
Well, they definitely overvalued it. The figure that I've been told is they want £4 billion to sell rights for the Club World Cup. Now, the story that was doing the rounds that was reported in the US was that Apple had been in talks with FIFA, but were only prepared to offer £1 billion. So if Apple were only prepared to offer 25% of FIFA's valuation and walked away, then FIFA are going to find it really hard to get a deal over the line. Now, you might have got the same email as me. The day after the Euros final in the summer, I got an email, a FIFA email saying that we have now opened up for tender the bidding rights for the Club World Cup, which is unthinkable, really. Less than a year out from the tournament, they're asking people to make bids for the rights to show the football. Now, it's a 63-game tournament next summer, 63 games, 32 teams. Now, the reality is that it's a 4-week tournament as well. And I think in the US, we have to, there's NBA finals on at the same time in the summer next year. There's also the baseball that's going on. There isn't a kind of a clear landscape. It's the Gold Cup in the US as well, which is a major tournament for the North American and Central American region. So it's not a clear landscape. So there isn't really a massive desire for a 4-week football tournament, which might have some big teams like Man City, Chelsea, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. But with due respect, Auckland City are in the tournament. Does anybody want to see Auckland City play, teams from, Saudi Arabia or from Egypt? I don't think it's a big seller. So yes, everyone would look forward to watching Man City play Real Madrid in the final, but that's 4 weeks after the tournament starts. So it's not an easy sell. And I think FIFA's problem is that they basically promised these clubs involved that, yes, it'll be very lucrative for you. So lucrative so that you won't have to do a summer tour after the tournament. Well, obviously can't do because it's 3 weeks before the season starts, but they're basically compensating clubs for missing out on summer tours. It's going to be more lucrative for the Champions League, but somebody has to put the money in. Now, one of the stories that's been doing the rounds, one of the rumours that, it's one of these classic rumours that it's hard to knock down, but it's also hard to stand up, is that at some point Saudi Arabia will come in and provide the backing for this tournament, and a bit like the Live Golf situation where Saudi will have ownership of it and they will put the money in, but obviously that would suggest that it's another kind of creep towards, Saudi Arabia's growing influence in football, that they're going to get the World Cup in 2034. That looks like it's going to be confirmed in December. So, but that might be FIFA's only way out. It might be the only way they can get the money to bankroll this tournament, which nobody seems to want to watch. But one element that Rodri flagged up, and obviously he's been a victim of now, is the injuries. Rodri's done a serious knee ligament injury, potentially a cruciate ligament, which could end his season. Now, we don't know that too many games, lack of rest, caused the injury. Some people suggest it did. And, do we think that this lack of rest is leading to injuries? I mean, I spoke to somebody at FIFA this week, and they say it's too early in the season at this stage to have definitive evidence that lack of rest is causing injuries. But, over the years, we know that players that don't get enough rest tend to be more susceptible to injuries.
Well, I suppose it's quite a small sample size, isn't it? The Premier League's only a few weeks in, really. But, Salah and Haaland obviously started well. Both of them had breaks. But then you look at someone like Martin Odegaard, who obviously didn't go either, and he's ended up getting injured himself, although that was on international duty. But, the one element of this that football as a community should be able to find an agreement on is that there should be a guaranteed fixed break for the players. It used to be a minimum of 3 weeks, didn't it? And that was kind of set in stone, and nobody could touch that. And then it just felt as though almost incrementally that has been eroded by, almost the clubs actually saying, well, we're not going to put any pressure on you to come back early, but it'd be good if you did. And there'd be players, I think of players like Harry Kane who would come back voluntarily early. I have no idea whether he felt under pressure. Probably didn't. It was probably his own innate professionalism sort of kicking in and wanting to, to try and gain a marginal edge and hit the ground running and not, feel sort of slightly slow getting into the new season. But that hard 3-week stop has just gradually kind of evaporated into the pressures of coming away on pre-season with the lucrative tours that the clubs go on, with the end of season, with the Nations League being put in there, and obviously now we're talking a lot about the Club World Cup as well. That surely could be a starting point where everybody can agree, well, actually, the players need a minimum set break guaranteed that they get day 1 to day 21, let's say if it's 3 weeks, and nothing can touch that. And it could be movable. You could say, well, if a player's not involved in their international games at the end of the domestic season, then their 3-week break starts there, or it starts later on. But there's got to be some way of saying that the players need that fixed, because if they're just constantly engaged, then these injuries and these muscular problems in particular, they're obviously going to break down, because it doesn't matter how much you're paid, your body can only do so much.
I mean, I spoke to Maheta Malanga at the PFA about this, the chief exec, and it's a valid point. So the point being, end of this season. So let's talk about Man City, for instance, that they will probably be in the Club World Cup final, or certainly to the latter stages. So Champions League final May the 31st in Munich. That's 2 weeks before the Club World Cup starts. What people haven't factored in between that is an international break. There are World Cup qualifiers. There'll be European, South American World Cup qualifiers. So Champions League final one weekend, World Cup qualifiers the next weekend, Club World Cup starts the next weekend. And if you're Man City or Real Madrid, for instance, then you expect to be in the final on I think it's the 14th of July. So the Premier League season starts a month later because of the World Cup in 2026. They can't delay the start of the season any longer. So what Maheta was saying was that this 3-week break has to be 3 weeks, not 3 weeks from your last game to your first game. 3 weeks, complete rest, and then you start your pre-season when the 3 weeks is up. Now, if that was the case next season, Man City players would have, if they get to the Club World Cup final, 1 week of pre-season training before the season starts. It's just not feasible. But what can you do? You can't delay the start of the season because then you run into delaying it and it goes into the World Cup summer. So the Club World Cup is a problem here. I mean, we can talk about the Carabao Cup being an unusual drain on the fixture list because the two-legged semi-finals, and that is an issue. But the Club World Cup is as if being thrown into a blank summer. FIFA keeps saying, "Oh well, it's only filling the gap that was left by the Confederations Cup," but that was an 8-team tournament, an 8-team international tournament. So it's not comparable. So the Club World Cup is a problem. There are obviously going to be issues where players are going to be getting there, if not injured, unfit, or desperate for a rest. So clearly, without saying, we can't prove causal effect here, but more games, less rest leads to injuries.
The counter argument to that, though, is that there are more and more players now playing well into their 30s, and you've got Ronaldo who's going to play beyond, into his 40s. You would think that more games packed into a short career would lead to more and more players retiring early. And
absolutely.
10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was almost unthinkable that players would play Premier League football sort of at 37, 38, 39. And that seems more and more possible now. That obviously the way the players are preparing for games, the medical treatment that they're getting helps with that. There's also that fact that they're just not training anymore. 15 years ago, players would play a game of the weekend, have 1 day off, and then train all week and play a game of the weekend. Now players just aren't training. I think that the bigger issue with the packed fixture list, rather than health and safety and injuries of players, is the quality of the games. Teams aren't getting that time to train on the training pitch, and the quality. I mean, it's something that Pep Guardiola has alluded to more than once. So you saw very well packing these games into a fixture list. The quality of the game goes down because players can't train. They're literally just living from game to game. They finish, they walk off the pitch on a Sunday, they go straight in an ice bath. Manager doesn't see him for another 24 hours. They turn up, they do a video session about the next opponent, turn up at the ground the next day, warm up and play. If it's a television product at the end of the day, which it is, then surely that's got to be something that would worry FIFA and UEFA, because people will turn off eventually if the games aren't very good. People want to see excitement and drama and attacking, thrilling, quick, fast football. If that disappears down the drain because the players are tired all the time, then people are just going to switch off and not pay the Sky bill because they can't be bothered watching the games of the weekend.
I mean, I've been told that FIFA are going to announce this weekend the venues for the Club World Cup, so it does seem like that we are getting some kind of tangible kind of outline of what's going to happen. But obviously they've got the situation with the PFA, the European leagues, and FIFA taking action against FIFA. Do you guys think that there's still a chance that the World Club Cup might get cancelled next year, that it might not go ahead?
No chance.
I can't see it, but I think a lot of it will come down to the broadcast money. If they can get a broadcaster to support it and not just pick it up on the cheap, then I just feel as though this is one of these situations where Infantino just hoped it would just sort of manifest itself because everyone loves football and the teams are involved and it will be all right. I mean, let's not forget how this was announced. Right, he just slipped this into the closing press conference at the World Cup, right? And I was in that room at the time, and I remember thinking, okay, here we go. Is this going to be as absolutely mad as the opening press conference was when it descended into an hour-long monologue about how everybody's, had a go at everybody else, and actually Qatar's brilliant and come here and have a great time. And really, it was a toned-down version of that, but he spent a lot of time just sort of talking about how brilliant the tournament had been, and effectively going, see, it's all good. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Everything's great. The football's brilliant. It's all good. Oh, by the way, we're doing this 32-team World Cup. Okay, 32-team Club World Cup. All right, see you later. Bye. And everyone was like, whoa, hang on a minute. And then you start speaking to people, like the domestic, I remember speaking to someone at the Premier League at the time. I said, has this been kind of arranged with you guys? And they were like, no. So he'd not had the sign-off from the domestic leagues. They didn't have a venue. They didn't have any of this sort of logistical infrastructure in place to make sure that these problems that we're now seeing, manifesting themselves 3 years down the line, that these would have been headed off before now. So I think he's just sort of hoping that it's all going to come together on the basis that people like watching football. And obviously that, as a principle, is still true. But if this tournament is a bit of a disaster, which as it stands, it looks like it may be, then it's hard to see how it continues beyond this first one. But he's obviously gambling everything on people, ultimately wanting to watch it. And then the team's turning up. And if there's a decent final, then he's got something that he can point to the broadcasters for the next one.
It definitely goes ahead in my mind. There's the embarrassment that it would cause to cancel it. It would be unthinkable for FIFA. And what will happen is that the last rounds of this Club World Cup will turn into the last rounds of the Champions League. It will be full of European teams because the teams around the rest of the world are on the same level, just like we saw when City won it in Saudi Arabia before Christmas. People will tune into those games, whoever's got the broadcast rights, and whether they get their 4 billion or it's $1 billion, the tournament will be staged. There'll be interest in particularly those last rounds when it's Bayern Munich against Chelsea or City against Real Madrid. The final will be an all-European final because it invariably is. People will tune in to watch it. And then the next time it's organised, people remember that people watched it, and there'll be more interest next time. It definitely goes ahead, and I can't see it being cancelled anytime soon.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I don't see it being cancelled. I think we have to, accept that if it didn't go ahead, then the situation that FIFA are in, they're backed into a corner because at the minute they can't find somebody to generate the money to pay the clubs. But if they pull the plug in it, then all the clubs, I'd imagine, will launch a legal case against FIFA for loss of earnings. So FIFA have to get it on. But yeah, whether it's the first of many or the first and last, we'll have to wait and see.
Not scoring goals, or not scoring goals enough. That's the problem. It's the key area. You have to score more goals. As a team, I think we have players across the team who have the abilities to score. But that's clear. You see all the opportunities we are creating. We're not scoring enough.
Now, Rob and I have seen quite a bit of Manchester United this season. They've got a huge game at the weekend against Tottenham. United haven't started well. I think only Ipswich, Crystal Palace and Southampton have scored fewer goals in the Premier League than United this season. Now, I wrote a piece at the start of the week about United's lack of firepower, how their toothless forwards are the reason why they're struggling. So, it's beyond that, isn't it, Rob? I think we know that over the years, United have looked at top strikers and not been able to get them in. And I think we've seen the situation now whereby their lack of foresight and their lack of being able to find a world-class striker has left them in the situation they're in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, scoring goals has been a problem for United ever since Ten Hag came in particular. I mean, it kind of went under the radar a little bit last season because last season was such a disaster and they couldn't defend either. So, people kind of forgot that they weren't scoring goals, but it's been a problem. Regularly scoring goals has been a problem ever since Ten Hag came in. It's been highlighted again recently, and rightly, because if you look at the metrics in everything that you would measure a game, they are all improved on last season. They're winning the ball back higher up, they're defending better, they're conceding fewer goals. But really, none of it matters unless you're scoring goals. And when you're not scoring a lot of goals, particularly multiple goals in games, it puts a lot of pressure on the defence, and you saw that in that FC20 game. You score a relatively good goal, but because you don't get that second and third, every time that 20 go forward, there's a chance that they're going to score, and you end up drawing the game 1-1, a game that you probably should have won 3 or 4-1. That there is an issue with the way that Ten Hag coaches, obviously, because if it's we're looking at an almost 2.5 year sample now, so that can't be an accident. What he would tell you is that the players are missing more big chances than any other Premier League team, and he would tell you that means that everything is right about his build-up, but he hasn't got the players to put the ball in the net. And then that comes back to what you just mentioned there about recruitment. Your 2 main centre forwards are Rasmus Højlund, who's very, very young. He's got no record of consistent scoring, and Joshua Zirkzee, who in his first interview as a Man United player said that he's not a goal scorer. It's a problem that is going to affect United all season if they don't get it right. And really what you're relying on is Rasmus Højlund becoming this 20-30 goal a season striker, or Marcus Rashford rediscovering that form that he had 2 years ago and being able to score 30 goals in all competitions. Because if that doesn't happen, you're still looking at a Man United side, improved as they are, but still not being able to score goals, still not being able to win games, and finishing 6th, 7th and 8th again.
Yeah, as we know, United's Premier League era has been, dominated or defined by their strikers. You go back to the 90s, Erik Cantona, you go through, the treble-winning team, Andy Cole, Dwight York, Teddy Sheringham, Solskjaer, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Wayne Rooney, Cristiano Ronaldo, Berbatov. I think the last one they signed that was actually at the peak of his powers was Robin van Persie, and he won the league, but that was now 2012, 2013. So I look back at who United have signed since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and I think apart from Romelu Lukaku, who at the time when he arrived, he was a centre forward in demand at the peak of his powers. Beyond that, they've really kind of done patch-up signings. You talk about people like Cristiano Ronaldo again, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Edinson Cavani, some terrible kind of loan signings like Weghorst and Odion Igalo. They may have done a job, but United shouldn't have been in a situation where they look at those players. Now we do know that they tried to get Erling Haaland, I think in 2019-20, but missed out to Borussia Dortmund. They looked at Harry Kane for a period of about 7-8 years, and James will be fully aware of this, that they never felt that they could get a deal done with either Harry Kane or with Tottenham. But in the last 2 years alone, when they've brought in Højlund and Zirkzee, they've looked at Victor Osimhen, decided he wasn't for them. They looked at Ivan Toney, decided he wasn't for them. And I was told, and I know you know this as well, Rob, that even looked at Ollie Watkins 18 months ago and decided that rather than sign Ollie Watkins, they'd go for Rasmus Højlund. So some really bad decisions there. But I think, James, you cover Arsenal regularly, and they don't really have a centre forward either, but they somehow are able to put the ball in the back of the net, whereas United can't. So what are they doing right that United are doing wrong?
Well, there's certainly, there's a lot more cohesion about Arsenal than there is about United, and you'd have to say that their goal threats come from much more varied areas. They're a better coached team front to back, aren't they, at the moment, Arsenal than Manchester United. But I think it's quite interesting, actually, that you mentioned a lot of strikers there, but there were a lot of clubs this summer that were looking for a centre forward, and Arsenal were very keen on Benjamin Sesko at Red Bull Leipzig. Obviously, he ended up signing a new contract, and I remember speaking to somebody at Arsenal after he'd signed that deal, and they really put the brakes on their summer plans. They just thought, well, all right, he was kind of the target. We're now not going to get him. There's not a compelling case to go and sign another specific centre forward. They obviously looked at some of the same names. They looked at Ivan Toney. Spurs looked at Ivan Toney. I asked Postecoglou about that the other week, and he admitted that he was one of the names on their list. They ended up paying 65 million for Dominic Solanke, and you'd have to say that's a punch really at that price. Yes, he's had a good season at Bournemouth, but he's taken 4 or 5 years really to get to that level, and we don't know what he can do in Europe. We don't know really what he can do at the elite level in the big games. But Spurs ultimately took the plunge. They paid the release clause and thought, well, we want to get another centre forward in, despite the fact that they already had Richarlison. And they thought, well, we see him as an upgrade. That was a punt that they took. It was one that Arsenal decided not to take, and it's one that United have decided to either not invest at that level for a player like that, or they've just chosen to go elsewhere with it. I'm I think it's interesting listening to you guys talk about United and the chances they create. It's funny because Sunday's game kind of pitches two teams that feel the same way about that. It's a familiar refrain for Postecoglou, and it was in the first sort of 2 or 3 games of this season that he felt that they were creating chances. They were not winning games. They obviously lost at Newcastle, created a lot there. They didn't beat Leicester. They created a lot there. And I think it's one of those where Solanke picked up an injury on his debut at Leicester. He's been out for a couple of weeks. He's managed to get himself back and scoring. And that maybe is a real sort of pivot point for Sunday, is that, they went and got their striker. They paid over the odds. Can he take it to the next level? United have ended up paying a bit less for Xerxes, who, by his own admission, is not kind of an out-and-out goal-scoring centre forward. And, you live or die by your recruitment decisions. And I guess Sunday we'll find out early on in the season anyway, which one looks like being right.
So I know you've done a piece about set pieces this week with some of the other guys, and I suppose that United's best chance, having read the pieces, is to fire a lot of set pieces at Tottenham and hope to score from corners, because Tottenham aren't very good at defending set pieces.
No, they're not, and they are something of an outlier in the Premier League anyway, in not having a specialist set piece coach, and it's something that Postecoglou's kind of burned a lot of political capital by defending it, really, and it's not really made a lot of sense, the argument that he's making. He sort of says, he's had this put to him a few times. Tottenham have conceded, I think it's 10 goals now in all competitions from set pieces, and it was really kind of brought home in the North London derby when it was a tie game. Tottenham played Arsenal, and Arsenal scored 1-0 goal from a corner, and Arsenal have got Nico Jova on the edge of the technical area, kind of marshalling every single defensive and attacking set piece, and he goes and hugs Arteta when Gabriel scores the goal, and yet you've got sort of Postecoglou on his own attack, defending set pieces, no one around him, no one looking particularly organised, and obviously a couple of the players switch off and they get done, and it's sort of it's quite a rudimentary analysis, but you just sort of think, well, surely you're missing a bit of a trick here. So that was kind of the sort of catalyst for doing the feature, as we sort of looked at some of the teams, not just in the Premier League, but also across Europe, about, whether using specialist set piece coaches is kind of the prevailing consensus now, and whether Postecoglou is sort of a bit outdated in his thinking, where he sort of, the way he defends it is he just sort of says, well, there's a bigger picture in play, where I'm more focused on the way that we play football than picking out moments in from dead ball situations. You sort of think, yeah, but when you play quite well and you get done 1-0 from a corner, and it happens quite a bit, are you not missing a bit of a trick here? And, if we take the Premier League as an example, obviously, as we say, Arsenal, Nico Jova is kind of the god of the set-piece world at the moment. He's, instigated a dramatic change at Arsenal. They've scored, I think it's 24 goals since the beginning of last season from set-piece situations, excluding penalties, and that's more than any other team in the league. Man City have obviously got their own specialists. I know that Man United I don't think you guys will know better than me, but I don't think Andres Georgian, who used to be at Arsenal, not a dedicated set-piece specialist, but spends the majority of his time doing it. Liverpool are trying to hire one. They advertised for one in the summer. Aston Villa have got their own, and he's a bit like Jova. He's one of those guys who's right on the edge of the technical area for every dead ball situation. But it was interesting when we talked about some of the other clubs across Europe that in Italy it's not really seen as the sort of specialist set-piece phase has kind of come and gone, really. And it's not something that a lot of the Italian clubs do. Similarly, in Germany and even in Spain, you'd think someone like Diego Simeone at Atletico Madrid, you'd think he would have a dedicated set-piece specialist, given how well drilled they are defensively in particular, but they don't. So it just seems to be very much a modern trend that the Premier League is going through right now, and maybe Postecoglou thinks he can ride it out. But the more they get done from set pieces and the more they're not efficient in front of goal playing the way he wants to play, the more it just feels as though it's kind of an area of improvement that looks really obvious and could be something they can address.
Rob, didn't United have a set piece coach last season or the season before, but they didn't score a single goal from a set piece?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's set pieces are a lottery, aren't they? I mean, a set piece is only as good as the lad who's delivering the ball. If you've got a lad who can whip a ball on a sixpence every time, you're going to score quite a lot of goals from set pieces. If you haven't got a lad,
it shouldn't be a lottery. That's the point, isn't it? That's the point of a set piece. They should take the lottery out of it.
So if your starting point is that it is a bit of a lottery, if you haven't got the players who can do it, then you're going to struggle. Then you still need to take. I mean, optically, from Ange Postecoglou's point of view, you would think that you would just assign or hire someone just to remove the questions. Because if you've got players like managers like Pep Guardiola and Arteta, who, obviously are about wonderful free throwing football, but they're still dedicating their set pieces to a specific coach to deal with that really minute detail because they think it's worthwhile, then you think that Postecoglou would be smart enough to say, well, we're going to hire someone anyway, even if it's just 0.1% difference to what we achieve on the field, then you would do it to stop all the questions. Sometimes I do think that the set piece narrative can be a little bit overblown because it is about the players you've got and the quality of the players at your disposal. But again, in a world where every single team is getting picked apart with every single detail, and Postecoglou is facing questions about, why has Arteta got his set piece coach, why has Guardiola got one? You would think you would just do it. United have got one. His role is not primarily set pieces, but United made a point of when Georgian was hired to say one of his responsibilities is going to be set pieces, to remove, probably those questions when things don't go right. Optically, I just think it's an odd move from Postecoglou. I mean, fair enough if he thinks he can ride it out, but
it's just a stick that he can be beaten with week after week after week, and the more he kind of doubles down on it, the more you just think, well, hang on a minute. You start to question other things, don't you? Really. I think if fans see something that obvious that feels as though it can be rectified, and it is an outlier against the other top teams in your division, you do have these set-piece specialists and do spend seemingly more time on it. You just think, well, you're, as I said earlier, you're just wasting a lot of political capital defending something that you could actually resolve. But I'm surprised you call it a lottery. Do you think penalty shootouts are a lottery?
I mean, well, yeah, in a sense that.
But they're not, are they? I mean,
you're going to go back, Gareth. No, they're a lottery in the sense that I believe there's a lot of work you can do to improve your chances. But essentially, it is. Set pieces and penalties at the end of the day are. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't put work in. I know that Gareth Southgate with the England team did a load of work with players when they were taking penalties and even to the point where who receives a play when they walk back from the penalty spot. I'm fully on board with all that kind of stuff. But I can understand Postecoglou saying to questions about set pieces, saying, well, there's a bigger picture. Of course, there is a bigger picture. But I would also say from that it's something that you probably need to cover, even if it's just to stop the question. And I imagine from Gareth Southgate's point of view, with the England penalty shootouts, that a lot of the work that they put in obviously has helped to a little bit of degree, but you want to be seen to be putting the work in.
Do you know what's happening here?
It's massive. It's just as big as actually doing it.
Mikel Arteta is getting praised for what Sam Allardyce and Tony Pulis were criticised for, in terms of, focusing on set pieces. Now, Tony Pulis had roared the lap and he was absolutely castigated. Oh, it's Stoke, it's a long throw guy, direct football. Sam Allardyce used to work endlessly on set pieces at corners and, Kevin Davis at the near post, and they would score lots of goals. And it's just good preparation by a coach. But when one of the more modern coaches is kind of forward thinking, it's not work on the training ground anymore. It's a set piece specialist.
Yeah,
football is always focused.
It used to be the refuge of the damned, didn't it?
Yeah, Rafa Benitez used to complain.
Were a shortcut for an inferior team to be able to try and compete with a side that supposedly could play football better.
Yeah, it's criticising people. It's basically people. They only went direct. Well, football maybe is going more direct. I look at Man City sometimes, and people, look at Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team and City's his early teams at City. A lot of smaller players, but now you look at Man City, they're a big team. Arsenal are a big team, and when you're a big team, you kind of exploit that by making sure that you can take advantage at corners, at free kicks, at set pieces. But if that was a Sam Allardyce or a Tony Pulis team, it's long ball. Rafa Benitez, Arsene Wenger used to complain endlessly about being beaten at Bolton because they lost at a corner or a free kick. But, the top teams are now taking it on board, but, repackaging it, polishing it a little bit, make it sound like it's forward thinking. It's not, it's just repackaging what has always happened in the game, that the better teams, the best organised teams, put a lot of attention on set pieces.
I think it's just detail, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's detail. And the best teams usually pay a lot of attention to the details and do the little details better than everyone else. And if it's something that you can do to gain that tiny little advantage, particularly in a game where lots of the teams are very, very well matched, particularly in the Premier League, there isn't. I know that City and Arsenal are way above the rest, but the rest of the pack beyond, there's not an awful lot between those teams. And if it's something that you can do to gain that tiny little advantage, then surely I'm surprised that, like James said, I'm surprised that Postecoglou is sticking to it as much as he is, because he does come across as a very forward-thinking kind of modern coach. You would think that he would be able to see what was going on, but I think maybe that's run into his own sort of stubborn personality.
Well, and it's also with him, it's an extension of a wider problem, which is that his style of play that he's so wedded to, that he's so committed to, and really uses as a defence, the bigger picture argument. They give up a lot of chances playing that way. So there are already some concerns defensively from open play. So if you're kind of adding to that by switching off at set pieces or exhibiting a vulnerability at set pieces, then it's only going to compound those questions about the style of play that he's so effusive in defending. But look, set pieces are ultimately about human error, right? It's the same with penalties, it's the same with corners, it's the same with free kicks. It's about minimising human error. And either as an attacking coach, you try and create that human error by doing something different, a creative tactic, switching players around. And from a defending point of view, it's about minimising human error. Organisation, knowing what players to mark, knowing spaces to mark, knowing how to mark. And, ultimately what happened for those, corners for the corner for the goal in the North London derby was Christian Romero made a mistake, switched off, and Gabriel scores. So that is about human error. And so I cannot understand why, someone like Postecoglou, as you say, he is forward-thinking, he is progressive, really bright, intelligent, engaging guy, doesn't see that there is a trend here for trying to minimise that human error by having a specialist set-piece coach really meticulously go through and try and minimise those mistakes. Because when those mistakes happen, it looks as though you're missing something.
There's also a mental element for players as well. If you're stood in the penalty area waiting to try and defend a corner or a free kick, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, this team, we know for a fact, score a lot of goals from set pieces, and they're really, really well organised. We don't defend set pieces very well. Just beyond any kind of like physicality, the mental element that's in your head, anytime a corner's being dropped in your box or a free kick's being dropped in your box, plays a part. So why would you not just eliminate that?
If you've got a recurring weakness, teams target it, and if that recurring weakness suddenly has, we've hired this coach, then the opposition team's thinking, well, they'll be working on it more now. So you're right, it's just a subtle difference which Postecoglou could nip it in the bud straight away by saying we've got a set-piece coach, but maybe he's one of these coaches that doesn't want to surrender that responsibility. It's a case of a collective coaching team that I'm sure they work on set pieces in training, but they just don't have it under the umbrella of a set-piece coach.
And he's not going to do it now, is it? Because it's a sign of weakness now.
We should also say that, even Guardiola's not impervious to the fallibilities of this. Look at what happened with the Arsenal game the other week. City obviously conceded that big chance to Gabriel moments before. It was basically two of the exact same corners, weren't they? It was Saka whipping it to the back post, Gabriel header. The first one's off target, the second one they score from. And so these vulnerabilities are there to be exposed by even the best sides. You think, well, if Arsenal can find that kind of edge against Manchester City, all-conquering City side, then surely a team like Tottenham would be looking to try and do the same.
If Mikel Arteta suddenly gets Ben White taking long throw-ins like Road Lap, is he praised for finding that extra 1% as a genius, or is he labelled another Tony Pulis? It's all perception, isn't it?
Well, City scored a goal the other day from Ederson, pumping the ball as far as he could to Haaland, who bars someone out of the way and put it in the net. If that was
I was on Twitter yesterday, and there's a 90s football video feed, and it basically, it refers back to 30 years ago this week, or whatever. And it was a Wimbledon goal at Liverpool, and it's almost like I just wish the new generation, the younger generation, would watch this, because this is what football used to be like. It was just a massive punt from the goalkeeper, a header by John Fashanu into the penalty area, and bang in the top corner. It was just the most direct football you've ever seen. But then you're right, Ederson does that all the time at Man City. But with Ederson, it's a long pass. And it's finding Haaland. It's all about perception. It's all about how it's received, who oversees it, who decides the tactics. But football never changes. The same old tactics are always rehashed and repackaged by different coaches.
Well, when City beat Arsenal 4-1 in the sort of title decider, effectively a couple of years ago, I remember right at the time about how long they went that day. It was long to Haaland, or from Ederson, or De Bruyne to Haaland, sort of long, straight diagonal passes to try and just get Haaland into the game higher up the pitch earlier. and Arsenal couldn't cope with it. Obviously, I honestly think part of the reason they've become more physical as a side is off the back of that game, where they thought we can't be getting bullied in the same way that we were then. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's back to the future, isn't it? We're praising things that were done 30 years ago, and Emperor's new clothes and all that.
Well, and it's the evolution of tactics, isn't it? That if teams are going to press higher up the field because teams want to pass out from the back and they want to try and win the ball higher up, then the obvious tactic to be that is to go long. So eventually tactics become more and more direct, and then probably in 50 years they go back to trying to pass out from the back and high pressing. It's just the evolution of tactics.
What was it Sam Allardyce said when he went into Leeds? Klopp, Guardiola, none of them are better than me, none of them know more than me. Who thought when we started this, that we'd have all ended up there, right?
All praising Sam Allardyce. There you go.